Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
Yes, you're very welcome to Wednesday Night Rugby. We have rounded up the heavy hitters for this evening/this afternoon's edition. Brian O'Driscoll, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Happy New Year to you.
And you too.
Thanks for joining us. And Keith Wood as well. Joining us from, are you down in Clare, Keith? Good evening and Happy New Year to you.
Down in magical Killaloe. We both got the memo about our dress code. No shirts for the pair of us, Trico. I can't say we're looking similar, but we've round necks are on.
No, well, you've nailed the dress code. It's okay. Let's get straight into it.
Mine's not Gucci. Sorry, go on. Anyway.
We've a lot to get through, both looking back on some very interesting fixtures over the course of the Christmas period and then some more into provincial games this weekend. We'll get straight stuck into Munster-Leinster at Thomond Park, Brian. Munster's first win over Leinster in a couple of years, so that's a big deal in itself. But that doesn't even begin to tell the tale of this game. So you've had a few days to take it in. What happened to Leinster and their discipline in that first half from a side that's usually so cold and calculating, even in the face of the worst and most difficult pressure to handle, and doesn't have in any way a history for this sort of a disciplinary performance over a 40-minute spell? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think it was brilliant to see the bite back in that derby. It had felt as though it had gotten a little bit sterile the last 3, 4, 5 years. Everyone's friends, and you forget about the rivalry that has built up since the early 2000s in particular. So to see that back and see, professionals very passionate, that will to win, boiling over, I think that's a great aspect to derby games, and we need to see that from a provincial perspective, but also from an Irish perspective. I think they're driving standards, and people see that as a negative. I see that as a positive, where these are people that really want to achieve and have that burning desire to win, and that's ultimately what's going to serve the green jersey well as well. So the Leinster indiscipline, I think you can look at it a few different ways. Penalty count is one thing, and then the sin bins and red cards is another thing. I think they'll be very disappointed with how many penalties they gave away. I think Frank Murphy, for the most part, had a pretty good game. He didn't get everything right, but I think he had a solid performance considering, the cauldron that was Thomond Park that day. And I think the Leinster indiscretions were punished accordingly. Possibly could have seen a red card for Tadhg Furlong. I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more.
Yeah, we're going to go through each of the decisions in a moment.
I think Frank Murphy got nearly all of them right. Probably Conor Murray should have gone to the bin as well. But
as a 40-minute spell taken in isolation, have you ever seen a more ill-disciplined performance from a Leinster team?
Not for a long time. It kind of them talking about not getting pushed around down there and not getting bullied, and it's almost as if they individually they lost the rag a couple of times. I think if you look at the Cian Healy, that's a sloppy one. The Fardy, is potentially sloppy as well. I don't think they're malicious. I think they're badly timed, as much as the Murray one is badly timed. So I don't think it's an intent to go out and maim, but I just think their timing was off, and as a result, they had to pick up the yellow cards and the red card that they did pick up.
What did you make of it, Keith? Because there might have been a couple of contentious decisions before Healy, who was the first person to be shown a card of any colour, was sent to the bin. And then you're thinking, well, this is Leinster. They're the European champions. They've so much experience on and off the field. Things will settle down now that they're down to 14 men. And yet, a few minutes later, there's another man in the bin. And then a few minutes later, there's a man sent off.
Yeah, I didn't think half-time couldn't come quickly enough for Leinster. They really needed to get in, to sit down, to kind of chill out for a little while. The psychological phrase is over-arousal, and cue a lot of twittering that often happens. But I thought Johnny had lost it very, very quickly. And I'd be interested I have a couple of things I'd say on Brian, but it's sometimes when one guy is like that, the next guy is. It's like almost when you've one bad pass leads to another bad pass, where you're just out of kilter a little bit. I would say the same for the idea of it being preordained to try and go out and hurt someone. That isn't the case. But I just thought they had no composure. I thought they'd built themselves up to having a battle or a fight of some sort, and they were emotionally at that level and couldn't seem to get down from it. I mean, I actually thought Johnny should have got a yellow card for his reaction to the hit from Wycherley. I know you're not allowed to do anything with the head in and around the head, the face. So, like pulling off the headgear, I actually think it could have been. Now, it would have been a big call, I think. And what I wanted to ask you was about Frank. It's a hard call for a guy from there to ref them. Now, we've seen it in the past with Elaine Roland. I would have said I thought I think he almost lost a bit of control because Leinster had lost control. And I think if you had a very senior referee, he might have had a better level of control in him. But I would have stood behind the vast majority of his decisions on the time. I thought it was a bit ugly. And I like having a bit of the bite back in, but I thought some of it went a bit too far.
Okay, so if we were to go through them chronologically, Sexton's reaction, which, again, just a few minutes of the game, I'm aghast at. And it clearly goes to Keith's point. These guys were expecting a scrap and had got themselves to an emotional pitch that maybe they struggled to step back down from. But would you agree that Sexton should have seen a yellow there?
No, I don't. I think on the basis that I really like Wycherley's hit. It's borderline. It's
laying down a marker.
It's a sighter. That's what it is. Yeah, I'm going to be here all day. Johnny's used to getting hit late. He's had a career of it. He takes it aggressively to the line. He encourages it. That's exactly what he did on that occasion. And Wycherley was finishing through and, driving him into the ground, and Johnny took umbrage to this.
And the opposition's playmaker in a big game at home.
He was getting his retaliation in early. And I tell you who was lucky was Jack Conan. He talk about someone that potentially is the third man in, is the danger man, that referees do not like seeing. Whatever about one-on-one scraps, third guy, a lot of the time is the one that finds himself in the bin. So I thought if you were going to look at trying to set your stall out early, if I was Frank Murphy, I might have said to the two captains that this guy's going into the bin because I'm not going to have that today. Johnny, I think he antagonised Frank Murphy a little bit early on. I can understand to a certain degree what he was saying, because we'll go through them in sequence. That was a penalty reversal, and rightly so. And then the Cian Healy one was the one that he had a real issue with Frank Murphy, because he didn't go and look at any of the Munster reactions after Cian Healy had straight-armed Conor Murray, because Keith Earls was very lucky. He went and picked up Scott Fardy and then looks as though he throws a dig. And in fairness to Frank Murphy, I don't think he gets any help from his TMO. I don't think he goes, listen, I want you to have a look at the extended clip, rather than just in isolation looking at the Cian Healy short arm. So you've only one set of eyes. You can't see everything that's going on. He's got to get help from his assistant referee, and he's got to get more help from his TMO. I think it was Simon McDowell. So I think from a captaincy perspective, you look. Johnny is an antagonistic type of person. He always has been, and he's fiery, and that's what makes him deliver time and time again, because he gets that out of himself. I don't know if it always comes across well, and it comes across as confrontational rather than conversational, and that's where the likes of a Rory Best comes into his own, where irrespective of how irked he feels, that you never really know how put out he is. He's the only one that knows. He deals with it extremely well. When he's disappointed, he parks it and off he goes. Whereas Johnny has a bit more of a heightened appetite for conflict, and so when he's trying to get his point across, particularly with a baying crowd, jeering and getting into Frank Murphy's head, you're fighting the cause at times, and. It wasn't. I think that side of his of the captaincy, because you're the guy that's trying to lead from the front, it does filter down to the rest of the team and has sometimes a negative knock-on connotation.
Keith, before we get into the other incidents, just a question on Johnny Sexton's captaincy. Felipe Contepomi was speaking this week about Johnny's credentials and that you wouldn't want to tame him in any way, and this is part of his personality and what makes him the greatest player in the world, certainly over the last 12 months. Are you fearful in any way that somewhere down the line, while we get to a World Cup, Johnny will have so much more experience as being a captain in big games, which will stand to him, but maybe Rory Best isn't the captain anymore, maybe O'Mahony's not on the field, maybe it's the last 5 minutes of a World Cup quarter-final against the Springboks, and Johnny just speaks to the referee maybe in a way that some of these other guys wouldn't. Is there a chance that there may be an incident that costs us?
No. I think it's possible, and I would have agreed with Contaponi to say he's got the credentials and he's the guy that drives the team, whatever team he's playing. That's in his nature. But I think he'll have learnt an awful lot from it, actually. And if he hasn't, well, then that would be the issue. This is a big game, a white-hot game. He hadn't played in Thomond Park for a while. It's a pretty aggressive place to go and play. And I felt he'd already lost his composure. And rather than the captaincy part, it's that losing the composure part is the most important part for Johnny. You still want him to have an edge, but you want him to have control on that edge. And I wasn't so certain that he had it. And so even when he was talking to the ref, he like the ref was talking to him, he was just shaking his head. He wasn't agreeing with him. He wasn't listening to him. And you'd learn early enough as a captain that you see things one way and you really want to get your team side across. But it can't have a negative impact on the ref. I don't know if it did the other day. He just didn't come across well within it. But you have to get the balance as a captain. Of course you do. You can't be the fieriest guy in the field. You can be unbelievably fiery, but you need to know what that switch is to turn it down to be cool and calm and collected, which he does as a player all the time. And this is just another one. So he didn't have it. I just felt for about 15 minutes that he wasn't fully in control. And that's a tough place to be as a player and a very tough place to be as a captain because he wants to do very well with it. And I just didn't feel, I just thought he was unbelievably out of his comfort zone. Would that be fair, Brian?
Yeah, I think a lot was down to the delivery of his message. It just, it didn't help that the crowd were cheering or jeering while he was trying to make his point. He had just conceded a penalty. He was the one that had infringed. So when he came back in, on that Healy incident, he was 1-0 down already, and so Johnny's the sort of guy that if he feels wronged, he'll carry that with him. And I think he felt wrong that the same rules didn't seem to apply on the second incident as they did on the first, and that's why you could just see his body language didn't look as positive as it should have been. It just looked too confrontational, and as a result, he didn't get his point across, and it became 2-0, and he had to go back, and it just was brewing in him, and I don't think he ever managed to get full control of the relationship with the referee, and it's such an important thing to do early in the game.
He's a detail guy though, Johnny Sexton. He's an honest guy. Probably no one criticises himself as a player than Johnny Sexton does. So, as Keith says, he's probably taken an awful lot from this.
Undoubtedly so, undoubtedly. And you don't want to curb it that much, because that is Johnny Sexton, the player and the person, and he will have learned a huge amount. Sometimes you have to find yourself on the bad side of a defeat and of losing your cool to really understand where you need to go next time it happens, or next time you find yourself in that situation. And I'm sure Johnny's a smart guy. He'll learn very quickly from that and not to allow himself get antagonised. But
you were so much younger than Johnny was when you were given the captaincy with Ireland. So did you find there was a learning curve?
Yeah.
How do I handle referees?
I was fiery too. I lost my cool with referees at times as well. And in a derby match, Alan Rowland, I wasn't actually captain, but in the Aviva, probably 2 or 3 years from the end, where the decisions weren't going our way. I felt that they were killing the ball, and I vented my frustration. And Leo was captain, and I thought I was going to go to the bin. I actually thought he's had enough of me here, and I had to say, all right, I accept. I'll let you referee the game. I'll stay quiet from here on in. But I was one more decision from going to the bin.
Right.
So I think you want to channel that as positively as you can, but it doesn't always work out that way. And when Yeah, Johnny definitely felt as though he was wronged, and he's a guy that does sometimes carry those things with him. You know, if he gets, I remember having an incident with him once, and he reminded me of it 3 months later, and I was like, "You've been carrying this the whole time." But that's the sort of person he is. That's why his fires burn the way they do.
It's not a bad trade in professional rugby, is it, to carry a grudge just for a little while?
It's a healthy thing, and you can see the. Is there a little grudge, but with Joey there as well, and you know that reaction on the scuffle on the Murray high tackle where he pulled him out of a ruck. You know, Joey was third man in, and you know it is this master and apprentice setting down a marker. I've no problem with that. People were appalled by Johnny's behaviour in that incident. I think there's no harm in letting the incumbent know that you're not going to be easily displaced. I remember doing it with Robbie Henshaw towards the end of my career when he was playing with Connacht, just to test him to see if he had some bottle and if he had the nastiness in him, and sure enough he did. But I was massively impressed by that, and sometimes you just want to test these people out to see whether they have the mental resolve or not, and I think there might have been a bit of that in Johnny's reaction with Carberry too.
Echoes of when Johnny was the apprentice and O'Gara was the master, and he was trying to take his place. It's the cycle of the professional game. The Cian Healy tackle, the high tackle, Keith, it was hot on the heels of Scott Fardy's tackle on Clute, which was only a penalty and did lead to punishment for Leinster, and that Munster ultimately scored a try off it. But is that just a straight yellow card anyway, or was Healy paying the price for the misdemeanours of his teammates prior to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. It sounds very anti-Leinster for me, which I don't want to play that card. I thought Scott Fardy's was a yellow card. And it's funny, and whether there's a kind of run in those, and I think if Scott Fardy had got a yellow card, I actually think Conor Murray would have got a yellow card afterwards, even though I didn't think they were the same, but I thought they were kind of part of the same. Cian Healy's, again, I'm glad to see them as a yellow card, not because of Munster, not because of Leinster, but I feel that we've let go a lot of the high tackle dictate that came in before the autumn. I think they softened off in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm not a fan of them softening off. And irrespective of whether we think that the game is very hard, it's hard enough anyway, that we do need to tidy up some of those, because if you do have a lot of high hits or it becomes part of the game again, I think it'll have a big detrimental effect on the game and the amount of people playing. I do believe that. And I do think it's something that has to be tidied up.
Okay, we are live on Facebook, of course, YouTube and Periscope. Get your comments in now. You could also be in the running to be named our Heineken Star Comment of the Week. The best comment wins a signed ball and, of course, some of the off-the-ball branded Heineken goodies. So do get in touch with us here this evening. The two main incidents really were Tyke Furlong and James Lowe. So Furlong, his barge in Clute, he's trying to clean him out of a ruck. Unfortunately, the consequences were significant in that Clute ends up getting carried off in a neck brace and on a stretcher. I fully, for what my opinion on it is not worth a huge amount, but I did expect to see a red. Furlong got a yellow, despite there being no obvious attempt to make a wrap. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think lots of referees would have found a reason to make it a red card versus a yellow. Frank flipped it over and gave mitigating factors that his head popped out, not knowing where that point of contact was going to be with his head. I thought it was going to be a red initially, because we are, to Keith's point, we are trying to outlaw that sort of challenge, and that it's a very, very loose challenge. There's no technique involved. He's come straight in. Yes, he's collided with his head, and as a result, he's been stretchered off. But at the same time, I know what Frank Murphy is thinking. He's already given 2 yellow cards at that point. Or certainly Cian Healy has been...
He's given one.
He's given one.
Could have given 3 or 4.
Yeah. So he wants 15-15, and I understand that too. But lots of referees would have had that as a red card.
Red card, Keith?
I thought so, yeah. I was interested in the rationale for it not being red. and mitigating circumstances, that's where we struggle. There's an element of law around rugby, and it makes it very, very difficult. It was almost a shoulder barge element of that. If you go back to Thomond Park not too long ago, and Danny Cipriani making a tackle with no attempt at wrapping the arm, it was a bang to the chin. I know it's not the same, but he almost caressed him with his shoulder. Cipriani did. This was a full blast. And people keep talking about intent all the time, and actually also kind of dismissing the idea that there's no intent on it. His intent was to clear out a guy on the side of the ruck, and he wanted to do it. He didn't do it in the fashion in which the sport wants it. That would nearly have been fine, I think, a few years ago, but none of those are fine now. They're trying to eradicate it from the game. So as soon as it happened for me, I said, yeah, that's red, and it wasn't.
There's still quite a few of those types of challenges going on at rucks, though.
But not to the head necessarily.
No, maybe not to the head, but lack of technique. So we still have a way to go to clear that side of things up, particularly at the ruck. People going off their feet and just using brute force, because as soon as some players lock on, there's no moving them unless you give everything you have in your power to get your way through the collision, and that doesn't always happen from good technique.
But not showing a red card.
But he's just thinking ferocity there, Furlong. He's just thinking, my size and power going through this impact will have too much for Clute. And he hasn't really taken into account where his head is versus where everything else is. He's just going in and clearing the space out, and he happens to make contact with the head. So as a result of that, is it probably a red card? Yes, I think.
And if we want to eradicate that from the game,
if you want to eradicate
red,
that,
doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
James Lowe, Keith, I don't think we're probably going to end up arguing over this, but it's an interesting one nonetheless. Sent off for making contact with Conway, who got into the air under a high ball. James Lowe never actually got airborne. I don't want to use the term took him out, because I don't think there was any malice or intent on James Lowe's part, but it's a red card every time, isn't it? Yeah,
all day, I think. But can I just say there's an element here on duty of care and duty of care. It's like a legal term almost to it. I think there's times, if we just take away from that for a second, there's times last year, I remember when Conway ran to make a big collision at full tilt, and the guy was on the ground, but he hit him and he ended up knocking himself out. He could nearly have been sent off for a lack of duty of care because he collided with his head off the other player's head. Now, those head-on-head tackles haven't really been gone or got out of the game. I know that the French are looking to try and get them out of the game. But when you're going at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and this is a huge difficulty in rugby. When you're going that fast, are you fully aware and cognizant of everything that's happening around you? And that's the difficulty. So yes, it's a red card. I have an element of sympathy. Should he have jumped into the air? He should have, but maybe he was kind of waiting because he wasn't in the right position to jump into the air. Maybe he'd overrun that spot. You don't quite know. But again, that is something that we have to get out of the game. You just can't have contacts in the air where somebody gets flipped over like that. It just can't be allowed to happen. However just that is or not, we're in the space where we're trying to get rid of it. And if you look back at 3 or 4 years ago, an awful lot of those were happening far more often. They are not now happening as often.
I get, Brian, that as Keith describes it, these things are happening at 1,000,000 miles an hour. But could someone like James Lowe in that position do something to mitigate the potential consequences? At least get your arms onto him. It makes some kind of an effort to get him to ground.
I think it's the most clear cut out of all of them. I think it's absolutely a red card, and the reason that it's a red card is what happens to Andrew Conway. He lands down on his shoulder and his head, and the only way you're going to stop players from doing that is by sending them off and outlawing that. The big thing most referees want is some form of competition in the air. If he leaves the air at all and bumps Andrew Conway and he falls awkwardly, I think there's a good chance that his worst case scenario is going to pick up as a yellow card for being careless or causing injury by that's a bad description. Let's just leave it at careless.
So if you get airborne, albeit lower than the guy who catches the ball,
if you get
the referee
airborne,
will see it differently.
he will think that you are trying to compete, and you are painting a picture to him that feels as though this is a fairish contest. provided you don't end up still flipping the player. If someone gets, LeBron James gets, 6 feet in the air and you still clip their legs, you're running the risk of getting sent off if they land on their head and shoulder. But if you get up, the likelihood is too that you're not going to take the legs from underneath them if you get up in the air. There's going to be a body-on-body collision, and worst case scenario, you're going to come down awkwardly on a hip or on a leg, and you're not going to come down and potentially do serious damage to your neck. And that is why they're outlawing that sort of challenge, and I think they're spot on, and Frank Murphy got that one right for me.
But how, on the furlong one, we said if you really want to eradicate this sort of a play from the game, that needs to be red. And I understand what you're saying on the low situation, but how does the situation change if the circumstances are the exact same in the future? If Lowe got sent off there, he's still going to find himself, maybe, as Keith said, maybe he's overstepped his mark, he's got there too late.
5 metres out, 5 metres out, you've got a fair sense. They've very good spatial awareness, professional rugby players,
you think Lowe had a
particularly
chance
wingers.
to change something?
You're able to calculate within reason as to the height of a ball and the distance and whether you're going to get there or not. Sometimes you'll get it wrong, as what happened, and maybe he felt as though I don't know what his view on it is, but he does not get out of the air. He knows, in all likelihood, that Andrew Conway's going to get up in the air. If he doesn't, he knows in his head there's a chance of him flipping him, and it's exactly what happened. So what he has to do is, as he's 5 metres out, he has to realise, I don't think I'm going to be able to stretch to get in the air myself, so I've got to come off the gas and just allow him to catch that, wait for him to hit the deck, and then I pulverise him. So that they're the sort of thoughts that you have to be thinking in advance, and they are hundredths of a second. But I think wingers do it so much, you do it in practice so much, your spatial awareness and your timing gets very, very good. And I just think it was a very careless and loose one for a guy that competes for balls a lot in his career. He's been in that situation lots of times. He must have known that Andrew Conway was going to get up in the air, and if you don't make any effort at trying to get off the ground yourself, and that happens, I think it's an easy decision for Frank Murphy.
Keith, how much does consequence and outcome play on the referee's interpretation of these incidents, in that Conway comes down somewhere close to his head and his neck, and it looks awful, particularly when you're looking at the replays where, a fraction of a second earlier or later, Lowe's hit might have forced Conway onto his backside or his back or his hip, and he gets up and he shrugs it off like Larmour did later in the game. There's no issue. And Lowe's committed the exact same offence, but he might get a yellow or just a penalty against him, whereas in this one he gets a red. Yeah,
I mean, following on from Brian's even, I don't know, like when you talk about spatial awareness, the second you saw it, it was a red card. The second you saw it, he was in the wrong position. I couldn't figure out what he was doing, right? When it comes to the idea of whether a guy lands on his neck or his shoulder, I don't even know if that should be part and parcel of the question. I really don't. We have to get rid of that out of the game.
But it is part and parcel of it, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
the referee's human instinct kicks in.
But that only happens, Keith, when players are flipped, when their legs get spun.
Entirely. So there is, but we've looked at it over the last period of time, and I don't know that there's an answer for this yet, right? So we've looked at it for the last period of time where people are going for the ball in the air together. And you say it's a fair contest, and they kind of half fall together and they fall badly, blah, 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 you can get hurt. But I do think that's a fair contest. You can't go and say, I'm standing on the ground and I expect the ball to land into my hands, when you know there's another guy going to jump like LeBron James to catch the ball in the air. You can't use that as an excuse. Well, my eyes were on the ball. Well, you're not aware of what's happening around you. So it isn't exactly black and white, because you can say, well, I've jumped up into the air, but I've no real chance of getting the ball. They're all variations or gradations on it. I think that makes it too difficult. And I think after 2 or 3 years ago, when they started getting rid of a load of these, and they stopped for a period of time, people stopped competing in the air enough until it kind of moved out of it. It has moved back in again over the last 2 or 3 months. But I don't know. I just thought that was a ludicrous challenge. I thought it was a red card all day long. I'm trying to think my way through how do you not get off the ground? Or have you run past the point? I don't actually know. But look, him landing, can I just say, and we just go on this again, we can't have a game where people fall from 6 feet and land on their head. That can't happen. Just can't happen. So whatever we can do to get that out of the game, it has to get out of the game.
What I found really interesting in it all is his reaction. Lowe was flabbergasted that the colour was red.
He was sent off.
Conversely, Tadhg Furlong was very, very pleased to hear that he was getting a yellow card. He felt as though it was red. Cian Healy, I think, felt it was yellow. I don't know about Scott Fardy. I personally don't think that one was a yellow card. I think if you're giving yellow cards for that, it's we're going to be competing with very, very small numbers in games. So, but the reaction of the players does invariably say it all, and I just think Lowe has gotten that one so wrong.
Yeah. It's interesting. We've been chatting for 20 minutes and we haven't actually mentioned any of the rugby that was played at Thomond Park in this really interesting game. So Munster have won it. It keeps them just ahead of Connacht and Ospreys in Conference A of the Guinness Pro 14. Keith, does the fact that they played so much of the game against 14 men make it more difficult to assess Munster's performance? How did you see their performance in that game?
I thought elements of it were good, elements were poor. I thought they decided to take a conservative view, kicking points instead of kicking into the corner, going for tries. I felt they wanted to be in a position where they absolutely had to get the win. And I feel that win was of huge importance. And I think when you use that in the background for it, maybe that plays into it a little, that they were a bit conservative. Sometimes you just absolutely have to get it. But I would have said for the last 2 or 3 weeks, some of Munster's back play hasn't been quite as sharp as they'd like it to be. They haven't been as efficient in the 22. So I think that's an issue. And whether it's down to the 14 players or 13 players, I'm not so sure. I felt we were under pressure as a province. There were kind of that idea that Leinster are the big boys all the time and they have to get the win. Almost, sometimes you can be afraid of losing and rather than afraid of winning. And I feel that we were, as a province, it's been constantly hammered in that Leinster are the top dogs now. They are, and I think the win was all important. I still would rather see Munster be more efficient and more attacking minded at times. They don't have to be Leinster. They shouldn't be.
Do they have the same skill set, Keith?
No.
And is that a reason why they cut their cloth a small bit on their on the type of game plan that they tend to go with? Because we know that historically they've been very good from driving lineouts. They scored a try at the weekend from it. They set very well. So why would you steer away from what you've been good at?
No, and I wouldn't steer away from it. I actually, it's funny because when a lot of the criticism comes for the backs and the back line, I would say an awful lot of the elements of things that Leinster have been doing for the last few years have been really, really good integration of the forwards and the back line for pulling back, for dummy runs, for good lines that go within it. I think at times Munster under pressure reverts to one-out runners a little bit too often. And Leinster do that too. And the All Blacks do it a lot, and Ireland do it from time to time. But I think it just doesn't quite get that flow that I think the fans and I think Munster would like to see. And so they're happy enough because they get a win at the weekend and they beat the guys who are being lauded above them all the time. But in terms of the progression, I think it's part of the story. But I wondered whether they would have gone and kicked into the corner. And that's nothing to do with back play. That would be actually to do playing into their strengths. But I think Munster will go out of that game and say, we're absolutely happy out. We've kept our discipline. We've got the result. We didn't play at the best, but we still beat the European champions. And let that not cover over anything. But I think they'd be pretty happy. Okay,
there's so much of your comments coming in on Facebook and on Twitter. I wanted to talk to you about Carberry and his performance off the kicking tee. Suffice to say, everyone's delighted to see how he's backed up the issues he had in cast. We expected it probably of him to go out and perform the way he did, but that's a huge confidence booster for him. Aidan Murray on Facebook, Furlong's tackle, probably a red, but as he isn't a dirty player that old, he's not that type of player. excuse saved him from it. We hear that so much in football. Richard Topping on Facebook, do the lads think the Pro 14 refs are better quality than the Premiership top 14s? I'm not going to get you to answer that because we'd be here for an hour.
They ref very differently, that's all I'll say.
Absolutely.
Very, very differently.
That is something I definitely want to come back to you on, and you as well, Keith, on a later episode of Wednesday Night Rugby, because it's a really interesting question from Richard. Troy on YouTube, are Leinster weaker than last year? They've been a bit weak since Wasps and don't seem to have the same dominance as last year. Niall Keegan says there was only one call as soon as Lowe was 6 yard out, not looking like he was going to jump. We all knew it was going to be red. Backs up exactly what you two lads have been saying. And Michael Ryan on Twitter, I say the behaviour of opposing teams against Munster shows a certain lack of belief in themselves. They know Munster will be physical and annoying, so they try to be that first. Great teams impose their game on you, not try to match your strength. Is that doing Leinster a bit of a disservice there? Do Leinster bow to anybody? Do Leinster show a lack of belief in themselves against any opposition?
I don't think this Leinster team, certainly not in the last 18 months, the way they've come on. I think the manner in which they can play, I don't think they fear anyone. I think the Munster aura over the last 5 or 6 years has, from where it was at the height of the 2000s, so the noughties, has significantly diminished, and as a result, I think comes with a confidence playing against them and a great success rate. So I don't know if I'd agree with that. I think they just, to Keith's point, they were over aroused and they knew it needed to be a physical contest, and they just got it wrong, individually more so than as a collective. 3 Fardy incident could have been yellow, and then the low red is a red, and obviously the Furlong and Healy, but they're not. They're just individuals making errors, and as a result, it looks potentially worse than it is.
Okay, a word on Connacht, Keith, because they have beaten Ulster for the first time in 3 successive games, I think since the 1950s, which they're breaking all sorts of records at the moment. And there is something very encouraging, very promising happening under Andy Friend. What did you make of them, particularly given how they've bounced back to... They must have been sickened by what happened at the RDS, and to show such composure and efficiency in their next game is a hugely encouraging sign for them going forward.
Well, I thought it was an extraordinary result on the back of it, because they were heartbroken leaving Dublin. And for having been so close, for having done something we talked about the previous week, we just didn't think it was even on the cards. And I have to say, I like the way Connacht are playing, and I would be a little bit fearful for Munster at the weekend. I feel they are more balanced, and I don't think they have as good a team as they had when they won the tournament a couple of years ago. But I feel they're more balanced. I feel their play isn't all or nothing. I think they have a way to do both, and to play with the forwards and spread it in the backs better. I think the skills that they learned under Pat Lamb's time has been very beneficial to them, but I think they have a better game management now than they had then. And it's taken a bit of time, but I think Friend has done a really good job. And I think they're a pretty serious team at the moment, and they've shown that over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, Ospreys losing to Dragons obviously did Connacht the massive favour, and given that, man for man, they'll be less decimated by the Six Nations coming upon us than the other provinces. They're in a really good spot, aren't they?
They are, yeah. I've been very, very impressed with them from early on. I think there's different aspects to their game. I agree with Keith. I don't think they're as player by player they're as good as the team under Pat Lam, but I think they're a better team. I think there's more cohesion. I've been very impressed with their launch play off scrum and line out. They have the same backs more or less, but guys like Tom Farrell has been outstanding for them. They've got a real cutting edge in their back line. I think Bundy has been brilliant. Some players play internationally and then go back to their province and vanish, or go back to their team and don't produce. He's doing it for both teams in green. So I've been very, very impressed with how they've gone about their business and just built scores as well. I think Jack Carthy has had has really grown into the season as well. He controlled things well. He used to blow a bit hot and cold in previous seasons, but I think he's got a much more consistent streak to him this year, kicking goals. So I think they are right in the hunt for qualification for Europe next year, of course.
Okay, brilliant stuff, lads. We probably could have gone on for another hour, but we didn't even mention the games that are coming up. Keith, you mentioned the fact that it's going to be Munster taking on Connacht. That'll be a really interesting one this weekend. That's on at 7:35 on January 5th. Leinster hosting Ulster at the same evening at the RDS at 5:15. Keith, thanks a million. We'll chat to you again soon.
Cheers, gents.
Brian, thanks very much.
Cheers.